As we look forward to the possibility of taking a sabbatical, most of us, myself included, imagine that what we're beginning is something like a vacation with a little bit of responsibility thrown in. And in my experience, it actually did start out like a vacation. And it had all the pleasures that a vacation might have. But over time, I found that elements of my work life began creeping in. Now, far from being a bad thing, this turned out to be one of the best parts of having a sabbatical. But let me explain. I began my sabbatical with a very specific mindset. My goal was to try to minimize my expectations, to attempt to open up a lot of free space for exploration, experimentation, to try to get a sense of what my life could be from this point onward. And I think that should be distinguished from a couple of other common types of sabbaticals. One type of sabbatical is what I would refer to as a skill development sabbatical. That would be something where you would take time off from your paid work and go and learn some new skill. It could be developing AI, learning about project management, any kind of skill that may or may not require going to school, but just something that you ultimately will be using in your professional life. Another common type of sabbatical is a project-oriented sabbatical. The classic example of this is an academic sabbatical, because professors and people working in academics have a lot of teaching and administrative responsibilities in addition to their research. And so it's very common for a professional academic to get a year off to be able to go and write that article, do that chunk of research, or finish that book. Now, my experience isn't directly related to those, but I do think that even that kind of sabbatical probably follows this same sort of course, so it should be relevant. Beginning my sabbatical, the vacation mode definitely kicked in right at the beginning. It was great. I realized that, hey, I'm in the you're not the boss of me phase, and no one's the boss of me. So I went to bed when I wanted to. I got up when I wanted to. I did what I wanted to during the day. And over time, I found that there were some things I particularly liked doing. One of my favorite rituals along this line was something I came to call tea and notebooks. And like the name suggests, sometime around mid-morning, after I'd finished breakfast, done my workout, I would make myself a pot of tea, sit down with my notebooks, and see what happened as I drank my tea. I would sometimes journal, sometimes I would plan out my day, other times I would write emails and correspondence, anything that came to mind. And that became an anchor for my day, a place where I could sort of orient myself to what was going to happen in the rest of the day. And it was very enjoyable. I also found myself doing a lot of curiosity-driven reading. In my work as a patent agent, I do a lot of reading, but it's all patent applications, invention disclosures, other patents, technical things related to the work I was doing. Sometimes it was interesting, enjoyable, mostly not so much. But now that I was on sabbatical, I could do whatever I want. I could read whatever I wanted to. And I took full advantage. Anything that caught my curiosity, I would go and take a look. Article, website, YouTube videos, books. I was reading lots of different things in lots of different areas. And it was really a lot of fun. And generally the beginning of my sabbatical was enjoyable. There was a lightness about it and an optimism about the future. And this was an optimism that I began to feel like I wanted to share. I wanted to spend time with other people who were taking advantage of some free moments in their lives. And I went looking for that. And I discovered that it is not that easy to find. You see, in our culture, work sets the terms for just about everything. It's the baseline, even if you're not working. And it carves out a period of time in the day and in the week, roughly corresponding to between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m., Monday through Friday, that is reserved for work. And other things typically don't happen in that time. If you want to get together socially or for some organizational meeting, that's early morning, or it's maybe a little bit at noon, or most of it is pushed off to the evenings and the weekends. Now, as somebody on sabbatical, that was exactly when I didn't want to be doing stuff. Early mornings were for rest or exercise, tea and notebooks. Noon, that was for lunch, for eating. And evenings and weekends were for spending time with my wife, seeing other friends, going out and doing errands and grocery shopping. That wasn't really the time I wanted to be socializing. And this was a challenge and introduced the first sign that I was beginning to move to a different phase of my sabbatical. The first sign was loneliness. I was spending a lot of time on my own and doing reading and tea and notebooks and reflecting is enjoyable, but it's not something that I found I could fill my entire day with. I really had a craving and an urge and a need to be around other people, to be more social. And I've had trouble to start finding that. But over time, I became more intentional about what I was doing. I realized this was something I needed to do, and I got out there and started looking for ways to fulfill that need. One of the ways that I addressed that was to identify a third place. For me, that was my local coffee shop. Found a coffee shop I liked going to. I started going at the same time, roughly every day. Not every day, sorry. Same time, but each day I would go, a couple times a week, I would go at the same time. So a bit more of time structure began to show up in my days. And I made sure to introduce myself to the people that work there, got to know them a little bit. They know my order, they know about when I'm there. And so it's a good place for me to be. I also joined an athletic club and began to do my exercise at roughly the same time every day. So I was running into the same people in the locker room and in the pool, which is where I mostly was, and I'm beginning to get to know those people, and so I can have conversations with them. I also became more active in my condo board to meet people in my condominium, and also joined up with Toastmasters. That was a big one for me. That gave me an opportunity to really get to know a lot of people in a little more formal way. And it is at noon and in the evening, so this wasn't exactly a perfect fit, but it works well. The second way that I realized I was moving to that different phase of my sabbatical was that I noticed that my reading was starting to change. My choice of topics was starting to change. And the change was around the questions that I was realizing I was trying to answer through reading. And they were things like, who am I now? I've been working 20 plus years as a patent agent. I was a very different person now than when I started that journey. Who was I now? Where was I now? What is the context that I'm living in now? Over the course of my career, I had moved several times, and now I'd found myself in Seattle, a relatively new community. And what did that mean? And lastly, what should I do now? How should I live my life? That was a very open question. The kind of constraints and goals and contexts that I had been in before didn't really apply anymore. So maybe the ways I was living weren't going to work anymore. To fulfill that desire to learn more about answers to these questions, I began doing a lot of reading of biographies to see what the course of other people's lives look like. I read more history, particularly history that was related to me. I read more science because I have a science background. I also read a lot of philosophy, a lot of psychology, a lot of religion, which was very new to me. And I even threw in a little bit of style and urbanism on the side because I was living in a city. And I found that this new direction was very satisfying to me. Having that intentionality gave direction, gave focus, gave a sense of forward motion to my sabbatical. And in the end, turned out to be very helpful in how I finished my sabbatical and what I went on to afterwards. So I'd like to leave you with the thought that as you consider your sabbatical, or as you are in your sabbatical and experimenting and dealing with what's going on, or maybe you're even finished with your sabbatical but you're reflecting back on it, to consider this arc, to consider that your sabbatical begins as a free moment, a vacation, if you will, but over time it becomes intentional, it becomes more directed, it does become a bit more like work, but it's a kind of work that's driven by your internal desires, your internal interests, your internal goals, as opposed to the external ones that we're most familiar with from work. Wish you good luck with your sabbatical. Thanks for joining me. I hope you learned a little something or gave you something to think about. And if you liked the video, please like it or leave a comment, and you can even subscribe. I plan to make many more of these videos, and that will allow you to be notified when I do release a new one.